This is episode 31 of Adventures in Supply Chain podcast. We are pleased to present the Data and Tech in Supply Chain video series with guest Dean Maciuba, Managing Partner North America for Last Mile Experts, and host Marcia Williams. This episode is sponsored by USM Supply Chain. USM stands for Unstoppable, Scalable, Mindful Supply Chain. Check us out at www.usmsupplychain.com to scale up your profits together with your supply chain. Dean is the Managing Partner North America for Last Mile Experts, where he is responsible for the transportation consulting practice in the U.S. Previously, he served logistics trends and insights as the Director of Consulting Services. Dean was also a partner at Forefront Consulting Group, where he managed general transportation consulting and the design/implementation of cold chain and healthcare distribution solutions. Dean worked for UPS/FedEx for over 37 years across multiple professional positions in sales, marketing, and operations. His vast experience allows him to possess a unique and in-depth view into nearly all aspects of the parcel transportation industry. In this episode, we'll talk about the following. What is last mile delivery? How can you reduce your cost in last mile delivery from the merchant and carrier perspectives? What is the trend of micro-fulfillment with on-demand delivery? What is the role of data and technology? What is the importance of alternative and smaller vehicle solutions such as cargo bikes and electric vans? And now with you, your host Marcia and her amazing guest, Dean Maciuba.
Good morning, Dean. Thank you for joining us today in the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me today, and it's really a pleasure to be here to help you out.
Of course. And we have heard the introduction about yourself from Ryan, but it would be great if you could please introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Dean Maciuba, and I'm the Managing Partner for North America for Last Mile Experts. And what we do is we design distribution and fulfillment solutions for all types of shippers, but with a primary emphasis on e-commerce. And also, obviously, the last mile gets a lot of attention. And we also have a focus on different last mile solutions, which are growing tremendously. And in many ways, they're growing because we have to find less expensive ways to support the last mile. Prior to this, I served UPS and FedEx for 37 years across a lot of different positions. So I have a pretty good perspective across the entire parcel industry. And I'll just say that it's an exciting place to be working in right now because of the constant change.
Yes, and it's great to have you. Very impressive experience. And today we are going to talk about last mile delivery. That is a very hot topic in supply chain. So to start, it would be great to define what we mean by last mile delivery, since there are different perspectives, opinions. So let's start with the right terminology.
You know what's fascinating is parcel carriers have been performing last mile delivery forever. It's not new. But in recent years, in the last 4 or 5 years, the last mile has gotten a lot more attention because of the growth of e-commerce and the cost of making that last leg of the delivery to a residence, which is really an ugly situation for the carriers. But in defining last mile delivery, I like to look at it two ways. If we're talking about the integrated carriers, that would be FedEx, UPS, and even the USPS. They are doing last mile delivery, but it's part of an integrated process that includes pickup, the middle mile, line haul, and then the last mile local terminal sortation and delivery. But in a truer sense, a lot of people, or most people today, define the last mile as one specific carrier delivering the last mile delivery, usually to a residence, from the destination distribution center only to the residence. So that's usually how we look at defining last mile today. Even though the integrated carriers do it, it's really that single carrier that handles it from local terminal or distribution center to the consumer.
Great. It's like, for example, if we are working with a 3PL, it would be from the 3PL location to the consumer, that is a residence.
And you know what's interesting there is historically the 3PLs, they could provide this service, but they always used a vendor, a local delivery company. And there are still a lot of local delivery companies out there that fill a critical need. But what you're seeing today is the advancement of micro fulfillment centers, or even traditional 3PLs who are taking on this last mile delivery on their own. And in many cases using an on-demand delivery service like DoorDash or Instacart to provide that service.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And also, Dean, you talk about cost before. So I'm sure like the audience would like to know, are there any opportunities for cost savings with the last mile delivery, and from the two perspectives, right? From the carrier and also from the seller.
This is a fascinating question, because if you look at this in total, there's two component parts that are concerned about cost savings. Actually, three. One is the merchant, the e-commerce merchant, who ultimately is paying the cost of transportation. The second would be the carrier, who is incurring that cost and charging that back to the merchant. And then this even impacts the consumer, because if the merchant and carrier can work together to offer the most cost-effective last mile delivery service or solution, then in theory, possibly the consumer ends up with a more affordable product purchase cost. Because as we know, in most cases, transportation isn't included, so they call it free shipping, even though it's not. We all call it free shipping. So the consumer is involved here too. So if we can get the merchant and the carrier working together to match needs and drive the lowest cost possible, ultimately it will benefit the consumer. Some of the areas where we can go ahead and look for added cost, so there are a lot of different ways that both the carriers and merchants can reduce that cost of the last mile. Estimates range that the cost of last mile as a part of the entire transportation solution of getting a product from the manufacturer or importer to the consumers, some people estimate these costs between 30 and 35% of the total cost of fully landed cost of moving an e-commerce shipment. So obviously there's a lot of room there for savings, more room for savings there than in any other part of the equation, including the first mile and the middle mile. So what are some of the things that the carriers and merchants can do to reduce that cost? One would be to totally avoid the residential delivery. And that may not be consistent with the e-commerce value proposition, where delivery in general is an accepted part of the overall solution. So what we're seeing here in the US is we're seeing the integrated carriers, both UPS and FedEx, develop relationships with local retailers. These are called access points, where the carriers, instead of making, let's say, 10 deliveries in a very consolidated residential neighborhood, what they can do is maybe take half of those deliveries, 5 of them, if authorized by the consumer, and deliver those to Walgreens or CVS, and then the consumers can go there and pick the package up. So that clearly saves the carrier a lot of money by not having to make that last mile delivery. The question is, does that savings then get passed on to the merchant from the carrier? And that's really an internal negotiation between the merchant and the carrier. But if that is the case, then what that should in effect do is enable the carrier to not radically raise the merchant. It allows the merchant not to radically raise the cost of the sale of the product, because they have the opportunity to realize the savings being incurred at the carrier level. Ideally, that's how that whole equation works. Doesn't always work that way. Some other ways to reduce costs. There's a new trend with micro fulfillment centers. And this isn't so much of reducing cost, but of matching Amazon Prime's one-day delivery commitment and providing next-day delivery service. Right now, Amazon has a tremendous advantage because they have the infrastructure, the distribution networks, the fulfillment center network that nobody comes close to having. And so they have more product closer to the consumer today than any other competitor. So what that means is they can support next day delivery better than anyone else. So what merchants are looking at is, how do I make that happen if I don't have that Amazon logistics network? And one way is to not use as many regional fulfillment centers that offer normally a 2-day ground commitment, and start using local fulfillment centers, usually only in major markets where there's a lot of density, and stocking a local fulfillment center, usually run by a 3PL, and offering next day delivery from that center so they can match Amazon's capabilities. Well, same day delivery from a forward stocking micro fulfillment center is not inexpensive. And so that's contrary to the model of how do we save money? Well, here's the real issue. If they don't have that option to do an on-demand ground delivery from a forward stocking micro fulfillment center, then they may have to use carrier express options to match Amazon's next day delivery capabilities. And those costs are totally out of line. So even though the cost of an on-demand delivery from a forward stocking micro fulfillment center are not inexpensive, they probably are less expensive than that express air solution if you have 3 or 4 regional distribution centers that you distribute your product from. Another thing that I don't think we can, we have to recognize is the regional carriers. And there's 7 to 8 to 9 regional carriers. And these players are very strong within their region. And right now they can undercut the integrated carriers, FedEx and UPS, usually by at least 30%. Well, if you can form a relationship with a number of those regional carriers and then put fulfillment centers in the middle of their territories where they can support next day delivery, then that is a definite lower cost solution potentially than using the integrated carrier or an on-demand delivery solution. The problem with that is you're going to have 6 or 7 or 8 different relationships with that many regional carriers. And historically, people have wanted it easy. They want to deal with one carrier, have the best service, and have the best price. And now they're being forced to look at all these alternate solutions, which makes it complicated. And what you're seeing is the supply chain specialists at these large e-commerce merchants, who are generally very talented people, their jobs aren't getting easier. They're getting harder because of multiple relationships. Another thing to consider is these regional carriers almost never have their own employees doing local delivery. They use local delivery companies. And those local delivery companies tend to be lower cost models. So there's a few ideas of how costs can be reduced. You know what's common through them all is it's not easy. It's hard to manage these multiple relationships.
Yes, you provided great insight and very helpful, specific and practical points. You mentioned, for example, that an alternative is to deliver up to, let's say, Walgreens, right? And I have seen that, but as you were saying, I don't see that those savings are passed on the customer. So it's very important, the negotiation there.
You know what? You're right. Ideally, the merchants and carriers are working together and passing savings on. Realistically, in today's age, especially with inflation starting to be an important component, the merchants are screaming because they're not seeing any type of savings, even though in some cases they might be getting less service. And so the question is, if you're not passing those savings on to the consumer, and the cost of e-commerce for the consumer, the cost of purchasing products online is going up, then what are they to do about that? One of the things that you may see happening is you may see a situation where the carriers actually offer this today, but it's not getting a lot of recognition, but direct ship options to an access point. So UPS and FedEx have about 50,000 access points across America. And right now, they've mostly been using those to redirect shipments at the customer's request if they're not going to be home, and they ask to have that shipment redirected to an access point. What you're going to see is you're going to see more and more of the merchants and the carriers getting together and saying, offer direct ship to an access point as a shipping option when you're checking out of the order process. And what that means is the merchant should be able to negotiate some type of savings potentially with the carrier if from the front end they're automatically redirecting shipments to an access point, which allows them to consolidate numerous residential deliveries. We're not seeing a lot of this yet, but something else you might see, and Amazon toyed with this in the last holiday season. What you also might see is some type of credit that the merchant will offer to the consumer if they take them up on delivering direct to an access point. I don't think it's going to be a discount for say, or a discount off their purchase, but what it will probably be is some sort of coupon, electronic coupon that gives them a discount on their next purchase. So I really think this is the wave of the future to incent people, incent consumers to consider the access point delivery solution, and then in turn maybe get offered some sort of discount coupon, which drives additional purchases for the merchant.
Yes, no, that's very interesting point, because we are used to receiving the packages at home. So if we want it, in particular during the pandemic, but then if they want the consumer to go to an access point, they need to offer some incentive. So that's great, yes, the discount.
Something else we didn't talk about, which ties into this, is we don't have a lot of smart parcel lockers in the US. In Europe, very different, tens of thousands of these parcel lockers. And in Europe, they're used to going to an automated solution to retrieve their package. And it's just not happening here in the US because our focus has been, the focus of the large carriers has been access point relationships, which really don't cost anything to develop. Whereas a smart parcel locker with banks of lockers may cost $20,000, $30,000. Yes. So it's been an inexpensive way for the carriers to create more access point locations by just forging relationships with retailers. But since the advent of COVID, something that's getting very popular is contactless delivery. And if you go to an access point, you have to interact with a person. Not that I don't like interacting with people, no. You probably do, but at the same time, people's behavior is changing. And in the back of their head, they're saying, if I don't want to have to talk to someone or touch a package that they've touched, maybe I feel better about that. So the parcel locker solution also offers a potential discount because they're being consolidated, but more importantly, it offers a contactless delivery experience. So maybe we'll see a change, a small change, incremental change with the carriers developing more smart parcel lockers for consolidated delivery. And at the same time, it's a contactless delivery.
Yes, no, and that point is related to technology, right? And also during the time that we are living, and we are going to continue for some time. Of course, we are in a much better situation. But yes, I see. Great points. And how about other alternatives like cargo bikes or also the electric vans? What are your thoughts about that?
Again, this is something that has been very prevalent in Asia and Europe for quite some time. And it's cultural differences that exist there that just are different here in the US. But a couple interesting trends are happening. 10 years ago, the cost of an electric, all-electric local delivery vehicle was significantly higher than the cost of a traditional gasoline-powered vehicle. That is changing. Today, the cost of an electronic vehicle is only fractionally higher than that of a traditional gasoline-powered vehicle. So that's absolutely moving in their favor. But what's more important, that the cost of maintenance on electric vehicles is significantly lower. So in theory, as these electric vehicle networks grow, the cost of maintenance for those vehicles should be less than the cost of a traditional gasoline-powered vehicle. And possibly that allows the carriers to control their rate increases because their operational costs are going down. Cargo bikes are a tremendous opportunity in both. You think of a cargo bike, you think of them mostly, I think, in dense urban areas. And that solution has been out there. DHL is doing it right now in New York City. And we have numerous small scale cargo bike delivery initiatives going on in the US. But what's happening is those can also be used now in dense suburban communities to make those residential deliveries. And those dense suburban communities have horrendous traffic also. And there are options for cargo bikes to almost bypass some of that traffic. However, the one major issue with cargo bikes is local ordinances. And what is the local community going to do to manage and control cargo bikes? Can you automatically assume that they're going to allow them to operate in pedestrian bike lanes? Well, you would think that's the case, but you don't know. So I think the cargo bike solution is an excellent opportunity for the carriers to reduce costs. Some of the drawbacks are nasty weather scenarios. You know, they still function in bad weather, but not as well. But we are seeing a lot of cargo bike development here in the US, companies manufacturing here in the US, whereas 10 years ago, you had to go to Asia, to find a cargo bike application. So now that we're seeing more companies building bikes here in the US, they're going to become more available. They're going to go down in price. They're already obviously less expensive than a traditional delivery vehicle, whether it's gasoline powered or electric. So there's a lot of opportunity for cargo bikes.
That's excellent point. And also I see that align with the effort with sustainability. So I totally agree with you, Dean. And so do lower cost solutions on last mile delivery have an impact a negative impact on the e-commerce value proposition?
You know, there is no question that we have to be very careful in watching that change, because if the carriers are trying to reduce their cost, and a lot of that has to do with them being publicly traded companies, and they have to think of a shareholder that they have to reward with a high stock price, right? So they need to reduce those costs at every level. And both FedEx and UPS are in a race right now to reduce their operating cost. So from that standpoint, could it ultimately mean less service to the consumer? Absolutely. There's no question that is happening, and that is at risk of happening. The question is the consumer just going to go along? And I would submit to you that probably that yes, because if you look like airline travel in the last 20 years, is it better? Are we having a better customer experience?
No.
Are we paying less? I mean, I think they're charging for pillows now, so let alone baggage.
Yes.
So what you could see is you could very well see a degraded e-commerce value proposition as both the merchants and carriers look for ways to reduce cost of the overall transaction. That's a little scary. You're always going to have options that offer full service, but like anything else in America, if you want more, you're going to pay more.
Yes, right. You get what you pay for.
That's correct.
Yes, excellent point, Dean. It was a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure that you can help many companies. So what is the best way to reach you, to contact you?
You know, the best way would be my email, and that's, and I'll say this slowly. It's D as in dog, Maciuba at lmexpert.com.
Great, perfect. And we will include that in the episode so everyone can reach you for your insights that are great and very helpful. So I would like to thank you again for being here. A lot of value, great insight, and very practical and applicable today. So thank you so much.
You know, thank you for having me. It was an enjoyable time, and maybe we can do this again in the future.
Great. Thank you, Dean.
Bye-bye.
Bye.